There's something that's both tragic and transformative about the role of a scapegoat in the narcissistic family system. For those who've lived it, the weight of being the one always blamed, dismissed, targeted isn't something that disappears when you get into adulthood. It shapes your identity. It warps your self-perception and deeply affects how you show up in your relationships, in your work, in your own inner world. And yet this role can give an incredible resilience, empathy, and clarity if the survivor is able to recognize the truth of what they've endured and actually start the healing process. When we look at narcissistic family systems, we often talk about different roles. There's the golden child, there's the lost child, there's the mascot, but the scapegoat is often the one who sees the dysfunction the most clearly. That's partly why they're targeted, because they see the cracks inside the illusion, inside the mask, and they question, they challenge, or they simply just don't comply with the unspoken rules of control and emotional suppression. And for that, they become the dumping ground for the family's unspoken rage, guilt, shame, all those pieces that dump on them. Growing up in an environment like that means living in a constant state of hypervigilance. Like as a child, you're walking on eggshells, not because you did anything wrong, but because your very existence threatens a system that relies on an illusion of what's happening. Like if you speak truth, sometimes just by being emotionally honest, the system retaliates against you. You're told you're too sensitive, you're too dramatic, you're too much, or you're not enough. And you start to internalize it and you start to believe it. And before long, your compass for what's real and what's distorted is completely thrown off. The scapegoated child oftentimes receives the most psychological damage. Like they're the ones that develop symptoms of complex PTSD, like intense anxiety, like chronic depression, deep self-doubt, like all these pieces that impact you, not because you're weak, but because this person bore the brunt of all the emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the neglect, the emotional wounds that aren't surface level. They go all the way down to how the person sees themselves. Like you learn not through logic, but through repeated painful experiences that your needs aren't valid, your voice doesn't matter, and that love is conditional in these type of relationships. And that abuse is normal. That's what it feels like. These are the children who grow up second guessing themselves every single turn. They struggle to make decisions. They struggle to advocate for their needs. They struggle to believe they deserve anything more than the bare minimum. And that wiring, those messages, they don't just fade the older they get. They follow into your relationships, into your career, into your parenting. They echo in your thoughts. Like if you've ever wondered why it feels so hard to trust your gut, why it feels dangerous to speak up, why you feel shame just for existing, that's where it starts, back in childhood. Like childhood didn't teach you safety, it taught you survival, and this is how you cope with it. It's also incredibly common for scapegoated survivors to fall in patterns of relationships that mirror the early ones. You find yourself with partners who invalidate you, who gaslight you, who treat your boundaries as optional, or constantly just project and shift blame onto you when things go wrong. And sometimes it's not even conscious, it's a subconscious piece. You feel drawn to people who just feel like familiar, not realizing that familiar is actually just chaos wrapped up in charm. You find yourself over-explaining, over-functioning, constantly trying to earn more love from these people who are incapable of giving it in a healthy way. And that's because of your conditioning. Sometimes another outcome is you often see a deep internalized narrative of unworthiness. Like many scapegoats carry that invisible scar that says, I'm not enough, I'll never be enough. Who do I think I am? And that inner critic that plays usually sounds eerily like a narcissistic parent, a family member. It's the voice that once rolled its eyes when you tried to share a dream, that scoffed when you showed pride in something, that twisted your words or intentions. It becomes internalized until it's no longer just their voice, but it becomes your own. The self-concept can shape every major decision inside of adulthood. You might not go for the job that you're qualified for. You might settle in relationships, convinced that it's the best that you're ever going to get. You might avoid taking creative risks, believing you're going to fail, that you're going to falter. And all the while, you're carrying a potential that's been buried under decades of emotional sabotage. That's the tragedy. Because so often the scapegoated child is incredibly insightful, is very resilient, is often deeply intuitive, because these gifts get covered up in layers of trauma and self-doubt that just keep layering on you. And sometimes you don't even realize the extent of the damage until later on in life. You go through a toxic relationship after a toxic relationship after a toxic relationship. You find yourself in cycles of burnout or anxiety that you can't explain. You feel disconnected, no joy, no peace, no freedom, not even feeling whole. Until maybe it's not until like a therapist names what's actually been happening, or you stumble across content that finally puts words to your experiences, or you hit a wall so hard you're forced to stop and examine what's going on underneath the surface. It could be from your conditioning. In that moment where you start to wake up to the truth, it gets really, really painful, but it's also the start of something really powerful in your world, because it's where healing can begin. Where you stop trying to fix people who broke you, where you start getting curious about your patterns. Not to blame yourself, not to put yourself down, but to understand. Where you can stop carrying the shame for the abuse that you endured, and you can start directing accountability back to the people who created that toxic environment. It's not about living in victimhood, it's about telling the truth. And finally, getting yourself free from the lie that maybe it was ever your fault. Many scapegoated survivors often carry this enormous responsibility for their family. You may feel guilt for going no contact. You may worry about what's going to happen if you start showing up, if you stop playing the role into what they've shoved you into. Like, you may believe that if you just try harder, things will be okay. That if you just see your worth, if they can figure it out, maybe they'll apologize, if maybe they'll change. That hope underneath, it sounds and it feels beautiful, but it's part of you that still wants to believe in love and goodness. But inside of these systems where you're the scapegoat, that hope is often used as a leash to keep you tethered. Keeps you coming back for more punishment under the illusion that this time it's going to magically be different, but it never is. When a child is assigned the scapegoated role inside a narcissistic family, and that what that child internalizes is not just pain. It's a fundamental rewriting of how they view themselves. The constant invalidation, the blame, the belittling teaches her that she must be the problem. And that belief doesn't stay confined to childhood. It follows her like a shadow into childhood, casting doubt over every decision, every relationship, every achievement. So it's impacted your world a ton. You start to see this programming, how it plays out in real time when you enter in romantic relationships. Like, you don't even notice how you start apologizing for things that aren't your fault. You minimize your feelings because you were taught early on that your emotions were inconvenient. You might deep down start to downplay success inside your work or brush off praise from others, not because out of humility, but because deep down you're still carrying the message that you don't deserve anything good. And this just isn't emotional baggage, it's an entire framework that the narcissistic family handed to you to explain your existence. That framework is rooted in shame, not guilt. And the guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. And when shame gets embedded in someone at a young age, it wires the brain for hypervigilance. Like, she's always scanning the room to see if someone's upset. She's constantly watching for the shifts in the tone, the body language, the facial expressions. Her nervous system is primed to detect danger because she spent so many of her formative years surviving emotional landmines in the family. It doesn't just shut off when she turns 18. It morphs. It now shows up in social anxiety, in people-pleasing, in paralyzing fear of rejection, of what's going to happen. And this hyper-attunement to others oftentimes leads to what's called fawning, a trauma response where she over-accommodates others to avoid conflict. It's not because she's weak at this point. It's because it was used early on as a survival strategy. Like, she learned the best way to stay safe was to just be small, just be agreeable, just be quiet and accommodating. And it kept her from being the target, from being attacked, or at least less of one. But inside of adulthood, it sabotages an ability to have boundaries, to advocate for her needs, to take up her space in her own life. And the tragedy inside of this is because she was the scapegoat, she oftentimes becomes the one that's the most desperate for connection, but least trusting of it. So it's like craving intimacy, but at the same time, it's like terrifying. It terrifies her. She wants to be loved, but she doesn't believe that she's even worthy of it. She may find herself in relationships that echo the chaos of the upbringing that she came. Men who manipulate, who invalidate her, even abuse her, feel oddly familiar, feels almost comfortable, because the nervous system often confuses familiar with safe. Unless this pattern is interrupted, it continues. One toxic relationship after another, one toxic connection after another, all the time reinforcing the original lie that she's broken, that she's unlovable, or she's too much to handle. And let's talk about decision making. Like when you spent a lot of your life being told that you're wrong, being told that you're irrational or selfish, anytime you assert yourself, you start to lose trust in your own judgment. Scapegoated survivors feel paralyzed when faced with choices, especially if they involve risk or stepping out of your comfort zone. The inner dialogue becomes filled with self-doubt of like, what if I mess this up? What if they're right about me? What if I am the problem? And this isn't just insecurity that's here. It's years of echoing of psychological conditioning. Like many of these women also carry a deep need to prove to themselves, not because they're driven by ego, but because they were never seen or validated for who they truly are. The narcissistic family doesn't allow for authenticity. It only allows for roles, and people have to fit in different roles. The scapegoat's job is to absorb the blame, not to shine, not to look good. So when she does succeed later in life, she often struggles how to enjoy it. What does it look like? Imposter syndrome kicks in, achievements feel like empty or undeserved, and if she doesn't allow herself to feel proud, there's often guilt that's attached to it. Like she's betraying the narrative that a family gave her. This is the role you have to be in. And that narrative isn't an easy one to break because many scapegoated survivors continue to be entangled in their family of origin well into adulthood. Whether it's out of obligation or guilt or fear or hope or that things will finally change or be better, they stay connected to people who keep reinforcing the same toxic messaging. They might still be the one who gets blamed for the family conflict. They might be left out of the group text, not invited to gatherings, talked about behind their back, and because they've been conditioned to internalize all the blame, they oftentimes believe that they deserve it. And what's especially insidious about this is how the narcissistic family uses guilt as a form of control. You're being dramatic. You always make everything about you. We're just trying to keep the family together. Why can't you work with us? Phrases like this end up being dismissive, and not just dismissive, they're weaponized to keep you as the scapegoat in a loop of self-blame and silence. So every time she tries to set a boundary, she's painted as selfish. Every time she speaks up, she's told, you're overreacting. Like it's death by 1,000 paper cuts that just continues to hurt you over and over. But the one who begins to wake up from the system, who starts to question the narrative, pulls back, goes no contact or low contact, often experience identity crisis because all of a sudden you're like, I don't know who I am. I'm no longer the person they said I was, so who am I? Who are you when you're not the problem anymore? It's a piece of it that's liberating and exciting and also terrifying. It's when we're dealing with the healing piece, it's not just about cutting ties and getting away. It's about we have to rewire the internal story. If we don't rewire the internal story, it leaves you trapped. Rewiring that story requires more than just insight and knowledge. It requires intentional work. It requires tools. Safe relationships help, like actual tools to work through this. But learning to actually sit with the discomfort without trying to fix it so you can heal. Learn to recognize, oh, I just had an anxiety spike, not to immediately abandon yourself to soothe it. Like it takes time to be able to learn how to validate your experiences instead of outsourcing the job to people who are never capable of giving it to you. It's about becoming the kind of parent you need, the kind of parent you've always needed, who protects, who affirms, who believes in you. The journey in this isn't straightforward. It's not linear. Like there's going to be days where you feel set back. There's going to be days that you feel pulled back into the dysfunction, especially when the family tries to guilt you for creating distance. There might be moments when you wonder that maybe it is your fault. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe it really was you being the problem. And that's normal because you're unlearning years of programming. You're challenging the most fundamental, foundational relationships inside your life that have brought you to this place. Like they've encouraged you to think that you're less than, that you're worthless. But it also takes you being around community because part of what the narcissistic family system does is it isolates you as the scapegoat. Makes you feel like no one sees what you see. Turns you into an outsider while you're still in the family. So finding people who actually understand, who've actually lived through the same dysfunction is vital because it breaks the silence and it challenges the gaslighting narrative. It reminds you that you're not crazy, that you're not overreacting, that you're not alone inside of this. One of the most pivotal moments in a scapegoated survivor's journey is the realization that healing doesn't require the abuser's permission. You don't need an apology to heal. You don't need validation from the narcissistic parent, sibling, family system, like whatever it was that harmed you. In fact, waiting for them to own what they did is like waiting for the weather to apologize for a storm. It's not going to come. The power comes from reclaiming that validation for yourself, bit by bit, breath by breath, step by step. This is when many survivors begin to understand the difference between anger and clarity. Anger that says, they hurt me and I'm furious. Clarity that says, they hurt me and I now see it for what it is. Both are necessary, but clarity gives you options. It gives you distance, and it gives you perspective of your situation. And in that space, something else can grow, which is compassion. Not for him, not for them, not for what they did, but for you. The younger version of you who had to do all this to survive all of it. The adult version of you is trying to untangle all of the lies, all the subconscious programming that's brought you to this place. And this shift, this move is towards compassion, isn't weakness. It's not like being less than. It's not about letting people off the hook. It's just eventually you stop carrying the burden of explaining, defending, and justifying your experience. You free up energy, like energy that you can use to build a new life, a life on your own terms, like relationships that are mutual, a voice that isn't constantly second guessing itself. You can actually find you again. And there's also the phase where boundaries become non-negotiable. You have to build boundaries, not because you're trying to punish other people or control them, but because you finally come to terms with what you can and can't allow in your life. And boundaries might be misunderstood. They might be like resented and attacked. But they're essential for you because they say, I'm no longer available for mistreatment, for gaslighting, for guilt, all of it disguised as love. Sometimes the people around you won't recognize the new version of you. That's okay. That discomfort isn't a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign that you're doing something right. Like when you start showing up differently, the system that was built to keep you in your place will push back. But if you don't owe anyone that old version of you, to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel accepted, because that version, like especially not, like that version costs you your peace. Why do you want to give that up anymore? Grief is going to come and attack you. Grief for the childhood you didn't have. Grief for relationships that will never be like what you hope they would actually be. Grief for energy spent trying to be enough for people who are committed to misunderstanding you over and over. You'll need to let yourself feel the grief. Not rush past it, not rationalize it, not minimize it, but sit with it, honor it, because in doing that, we make room for what is next. What's next is self-trust, self-respect, self-reclamation. Like the ability to walk into a room without shrinking, the ability to say no without explaining yourself, the ability to know deep down in your bones that your worth isn't dependent on who accepts you, but on the fact that you exist. You don't have to earn dignity. You don't have to hustle for love. You already are enough. Please hear me with that. And when you start living from that truth, from that reality, watch what happens. Watch how your relationships start to shift. Watch how your standards start to rise. Watch how people who once saw you as easy to manipulate or naive now start to disappear. And let them, because the people that remain, what remains there is for you to rebuild. It's yours. It's real. It's rooted in truth, not survival mode and not other people trying to control you. You might still have moments in all this of doubt. That's okay. Like healing isn't going to erase all your pain. It's about holding it differently. It's about learning that your past might explain you, but it doesn't define you or say who you're going to be. You're allowed to move forward, even if he never says sorry. You're allowed to create joy, even if your past is full of sorrow. You're allowed to take up space, to have needs, to have boundaries, and to let go of people that punish you for doing so. If anything I've said resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in this story, then I want you to know that you're not alone. So many women who are scapegoated as children carry this invisible burden into every corner of their adult lives, and many of them never get the support they need because the world doesn't see what they've endured. But I do. I see it and I hear it every single day, and I want to invite you into something that's completely different. If you're at the place where you're ready to break this cycle for good, then I want to offer you a safe space to start that journey. Not with pressure, not with shame, not with guilt, but with real support with someone who understands the narcissistic dynamics that you've been trapped in for such a long period of time. There's your invitation to take back your story, to start rewiring and rewriting new chapters inside of your world that aren't dictated by other people, the people that hurt you. So if you're ready, like really ready to start stepping into your healing and start building a future that's free from manipulation, from guilt, from emotional abuse, then let's talk. Comment the word breakthrough down below and I'll reach out with the next step. I want to be able to help provide steps for you to see how to actually move forward. We're going to do this inside of a free strategy call. This is your time, not just to keep surviving, but to learn how to thrive. I'll see you there. You've been told it's all your fault and that makes you feel crazy. No one understands you and that leaves you in a place of being alone. You've tried to break free multiple times and that leaves you helpless because nothing you've done has actually worked. It hasn't actually got you free or liberated from this toxic relationship. So you feel crazy, alone, and hopeless. Guess what? That's a lie. Because all it is how you've been raised and conditioned inside of this abusive relationship over and over. And as a result, you've sacrificed your growth, you've sacrificed your worth, and you've been trapped inside of a toxic relationship. What if I showed you the path to freedom? A way for you to actually get free mentally and emotionally from the toxicity that's happening right here, right now. You deserve more. You deserve to be able to heal. And I want to help you with that. If I can help you with that, go to rawmotivations.com/breakthrough, schedule a call there, and let's talk.